Oga, please hurry.
I'm coming.
You've been coming since morning.
Please! I can't hold this thing again. Who is last?
Me. Mama, there is a queue.
I know. But we've been waiting. I am the landlord's wife. Mama, why did you lock the kitchen? Nobody is cooking today. Why? Because I am angry. Angry with who? All of you. But my soup is inside. Let it stay there. Mama, this is a shared kitchen. Exactly. So I have shared my anger with everybody. This woman is not serious. I heard that.
This compound is finished.
My people, I have good news. My wife and I are getting married again.
Again? Chief, you people have been married for over 20 years.
Did we ask you to count?
So what happened to the first marriage? Expired?
Maybe they forgot they already married each other.
Laugh all you want. We are renewing our vows. Mama, after all these years, what is wrong with our timing? Nothing. We are just wondering if you people are doing wedding or naming ceremony. Anyway, everybody will buy this cloth. Everybody?
Everybody.
Sir, is it compulsory?
Very compulsory.
So this wedding has turned to compulsory subscription?
If you live in my compound, you must support my marriage.
After 20 years? Yes. And anybody who doesn't buy should not come to the wedding. This compound has officially entered another level of Wahala.
And that was just morning one. Subscribe now because trust me, this is nothing compared to what's coming. Let's rewind and start from the beginning. Somewhere in a busy, noisy part of Lagos, there stood a compound that everybody in the area simply called Boniface House. It was not a fancy building. It was the classic face me, I face you setup. Rooms facing each other in 2 straight lines, one shared kitchen at the back, one shared toilet beside it, and one long corridor where children rode bicycles, women hung wrapper to dry, and news traveled faster than NTA network news. The paint on the outside walls had faded from what used to be cream to something closer to old newspaper. The gate creaked every time it opened, loud enough that nobody in that compound could ever sneak in late at night without the whole building knowing. And right there, at the very front, hung a small wooden signboard that read, Boniface House, no loitering, no owing rent. A sign Chief Boniface himself had commissioned as if tenants needed reminding. In this compound lived several tenants, each one managing life the best way they could. There was Chinedu, a young man who worked as a bus conductor and was always broke by the 20th of the month, forever borrowing small change from whoever still had money left. There was Emeka, his close friend, a phone repairer who fixed everybody's cracked screens but somehow never fixed his own life, always owing somebody something. There was Sei, a quiet, hard-working man who did menial jobs around the estate to survive, the kind of person who greeted everybody but rarely joined the gist. On the women's side, there was Blessing, a hairdresser who plaited hair for half the street and gossiped for the other half, her small shop front chair always occupied by somebody getting their hair done while catching up on compound news. There was Ngozi, a food seller who woke up before the cock itself to start frying akara by the roadside, her pepper and onion smell drifting into every room by 6 in the morning. And there was Auntie Rachel, an older widow who minded her business but somehow always got dragged into every single compound wahala. Anyway, usually because she was the only one brave enough to say what everybody else was thinking. All these good people had one thing in common. They were tenants of Chief Boniface, and by extension, they were also subjects of his wife, Mama Boniface, a woman whose mouth alone could clear an entire market square. Chief Boniface himself was not a bad-looking man. He walked around in his native attire like a senator, greeted everyone with a big smile, and called every tenant my brother or my sister. But underneath that smile was a man who saw every single situation, good or bad, as an opportunity to collect money. If your pipe burst, he would smile and say, "No wahala, we will fix it, just small maintenance fee." If NEPA brought light for 1 hour, he would smile and say, since light don't come, make we discuss light bill. He carried a small notebook everywhere he went, and tenants had learned, painfully, that whenever he brought that notebook out, something expensive was coming. And Mama Boniface was simply Chief Boniface's engine. Whatever small mercy that might have existed in her husband's heart, she made sure it never survived contact with reality. She believed with her full chest that being married to a landlord automatically made her a landlord too, with landlord rights, landlord privileges, and zero landlord responsibilities. She wore her wrapper high on her chest like a uniform, kept a toothbrush permanently hanging out of her mouth at inconvenient hours, and had perfected the art of appearing exactly where trouble was about to start. Together, this couple ran that compound like their own personal kingdom, and the tenants were simply loyal, suffering subjects, bound together not by love for their landlord, but by the shared experience of surviving him. Now, let's talk about the shared toilet, because that toilet alone deserves its own award for causing daily drama. You already saw how that particular morning went, Mama Boniface strolling straight past a queue of desperate, sweating tenants like she owned the whole building, toothbrush and all, reminding everybody calm as anything that she was the landlord's wife before disappearing inside and locking the door behind her. Well, that was not a rare event. That was simply a normal Tuesday in Boniface House. By the time Mama Boniface finally emerged, humming a church chorus like she had not just held an entire compound hostage, Seyi could no longer wait. He simply turned, walked briskly towards the bush path behind the compound wall, and disappeared for several long, undignified minutes, while the remaining tenants pretended not to notice, because in that compound, minding your own business was sometimes the kindest thing you could do for a neighbor. This was not, unfortunately, an isolated incident. The toilet queue had over time become such a predictable part of compound life that tenants had started developing their own private strategies just to survive it. Emeka had taken to waking up full 30 minutes earlier than necessary purely to beat Mama Boniface to the door, a strategy that worked exactly twice before she adjusted her own schedule to match his. Chinedu, less patient, had once tried knocking on the door with increasing urgency while Mama Boniface was inside, only for her to shout through the door that patience was a virtue, delivered in the calm tone of someone who was not, in fact, the fifth person waiting outside. Blessing eventually solved her own toilet problem by striking a quiet deal with a neighbor 2 compounds down, a fellow hairdresser she had plated for years, who allowed her limited access to their facilities in genuine emergencies. It was, as Blessing herself jokes to her hair clients, a sad state of affairs when a grown woman needed a backup toilet plan simply to survive her own landlord's compound. But such was life in Boniface House.
If you thought the toilet was bad, wait until you hear how the kitchen standoff actually ended. You already caught the padlock scene, the beans mess nobody confessed to, Mama Boniface sitting guard over that kitchen like it held gold bars, and telling anybody who complained to simply let their soup stay inside and go and buy food outside. Auntie Rachel even tried appealing to her better nature that morning, gently reminding her that not everybody had spare money for buying food outside every single day. Mama Boniface's answer, delivered without even turning her head, was that hunger builds discipline, a statement that made absolutely nobody in that corridor feel better. The tenants stood there, defeated, watching their landlord's wife guard an empty kitchen like it contained gold bars and not just a dirty pot of beans. Later that afternoon, Chief Boniface returned home from wherever he had gone to collect money from someone else's problem, and the first thing that hit him was hunger. He walked straight to the kitchen, expecting his usual pounded yam, only to meet a padlock and his wife sitting guard like a soldier. He demanded that she open the door immediately. Mama Boniface, still vibrating from that morning's beans incident, refused. She was still angry, she said, and angry people do not cook. Chief Boniface was not ready to argue with an empty stomach. He simply walked to their room, brought out his own spare key, and opened the kitchen himself, right in front of everybody. The tenants rushed in like they were entering a stadium doing a free ticket giveaway. Pots came down from shelves, gas burners clicked on, the whole kitchen came back to life within seconds. And in the middle of all that noise and relief, guess who casually strolled in with her own pot, ready to cook like nothing had happened just 1 hour earlier?
Mama Boniface herself. Blessing, still holding her own pot, stopped and stared at her in disbelief. She reminded her, respectfully but firmly, that she was the same person who had declared with her full chest that nobody was cooking that day. Mama Boniface did not even flinch. She simply adjusted her wrapper, lit her gas burner, and delivered the line that tenant in that compound would repeat for years to come. She said, "Nobody," she replied calmly. "I didn't say me." Ngozi, still salvaging her cold soup from earlier, laughed so hard she nearly dropped the pot, while Chinedu leaned toward Emeka and whispered that this woman deserved a chieftaincy title of her own, Iyalaje of Wahala. And honestly, nobody in earshot disagreed. And that, my dear viewer, was only the beginning of what this couple had in store for that poor compound. If this story is already giving you the kind of laughter and drama you enjoy, please do me one favor. Smash that subscribe button right now. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and stay with me because what happens next in this compound is even more shocking than the kitchen wahala. Let's continue. Some weeks after the kitchen incident, Chief Boniface and Mama Boniface attended a wedding in a nearby estate. It was a big, colorful event, and the couple getting married had clearly made serious money from selling their Shoebi cloth to guests. Chief Boniface watched the money exchange hands throughout the ceremony, and something inside him began to calculate. On their way home that evening, still in their wedding clothes, he turned to his wife with a glowing idea. They had been married for over 20 years, he reminded her. 20 solid years of managing tenants, collecting rent, and building their empire. Why not renew their wedding vows? And better still, why not sell their own wedding clothes to their tenants the same way that couple at the wedding had done? Mama Boniface's eyes lit up immediately. She loved the idea, not because of romance, but because of arithmetic. If they had, say, 20 tenants, and each tenant bought cloth, that was already good money before the actual wedding vow renewal even started. By the time they got home, she had already mentally decided on a color, a design, and a price that was considerably higher than what the cloth would actually cost her to buy. The very next week, the couple called a compound meeting, and you already heard how that one went. The shock on everybody's faces, the jokes about wedding versus naming ceremony, and Mama Boniface making it painfully clear that the cloth was compulsory whether anybody liked it or not, right down to warning that anybody who refused to buy should not bother showing up. What you have not heard yet is what happened after that meeting ended. Despite the murmuring on their way back to their rooms, some tenants, not wanting trouble with their landlord, reluctantly agreed to buy the cloth. Ngozi bought hers quietly, calculating that the goodwill might earn her a little slack next time her rent was late. Others, like Sei, quietly refused, mumbling that rent was already enough wahala without adding cloth money on top. Auntie Rachel also declined, telling Mama Boniface plainly, with the confidence only an older widow could manage, that she had already won enough Ashoebi in her lifetime and did not need one more Ashoebi. Mama Boniface did not take these refusals quietly. She began a slow, deliberate campaign of guilt around the compound, mentioning within earshot of Sei how some people in that compound clearly did not respect their landlord enough to celebrate his milestones, and mentioning within earshot of Auntie Rachel how some elders set a bad example for younger tenants by refusing to support compound unity. Chinedu, watching all this unfold, told Emeka privately that Mama Boniface should have gone into politics because the woman clearly understood the art of pressure better than half the local government chairmen he had seen on television. By the time the cloth-selling window closed, Mama Boniface and Chief Boniface had sold just enough to 17 out of 22 tenants to convince themselves the whole idea was a triumph, conveniently ignoring the 5 who had held firm. Mama Boniface spent the following days proudly parading around the compound with a sample of the cloth draped over her shoulder, showing it to anyone who would look, while Chief Boniface began to plan the ceremony itself with the seriousness of a man organizing a state function. The wedding vow renewal day finally arrived. Chief Boniface and Mama Boniface transformed their small compound frontage into what they believed was a mini event center. Canopies were rented, a small band was hired, jollof rice was cooked in a giant pot that could feed half the street, and drinks were arranged in coolers by the gate. At the center of it all sat one long empty table, beautifully decorated with a big handwritten sign that said, "Gifts for the celebrants." Mama Boniface kept glancing at that table throughout the ceremony, practically rubbing her palms together in anticipation. Guests arrived, tenants arrived, everybody dressed well, everybody smiling.
Chief Boniface, dressed in an oversized agbada that made him sweat within the first 20 minutes, stood at the entrance shaking hands and thanking people for coming, occasionally glancing sideways at the gift table himself, as if his stare alone could will something to appear on it. The food disappeared plate after plate. The drinks finished faster than they were poured. Chinedu and Emeka, never once to waste a free meal, went back for seconds and thirds, loading their plates so high that Blessing joked they were eating enough jollof rice to last them until the next rent increase. Music played, people danced, children ran around chasing each other between the canopy poles. It was, by every account, a successful party. There was just one small problem. Nobody, not a single soul, dropped anything on that gift table. By the time the event ended and the last guests zipped up their jacket to leave, Chief Boniface and Mama Boniface stood beside their empty gift table, staring at it the way a farmer stares at a field after a failed harvest. All that jollof rice, all that drinks, all that noise and dancing, and they had nothing to show for it except used plates, scattered chairs, and a compound that now smelled like party rice. Mama Boniface's mood turned dark almost instantly. She began muttering under her breath about ungrateful tenants who could eat free food all day but could not drop even 1,000 naira on a gift table. Chief Boniface, equally bitter, said nothing, but everybody who knew him understood that silence from Chief Boniface was more dangerous than shouting. It meant he was calculating. The very next morning, before the compound had even finished sweeping away the party decorations, Chief Boniface called another emergency meeting. The tenants gathered, still slightly hungover from the previous night's excitement, expecting maybe a thank you speech or some leftover jollof to take home. Instead, Chief Boniface cleared his throat and announced without warning that rent across the entire compound would be increasing, effective immediately. The corridor erupted into confused murmurs. Emeka asked quite reasonably what exactly had changed to cause such a sudden increase. Chief Boniface mentioned something vague about rising cost of maintenance and general economic hardship in the country, but every single tenant standing there knew deep down exactly what this was really about. It had nothing to do with the economy. It had everything to do with an empty gift table from the night before. For most of the tenants, this was simply one more thing to grumble about and somehow absorb, the same way Nigerians absorb almost everything. Blessing rolled her eyes and said she would simply raise her hair plaiting prices to match. Chinedu joked bitterly that soon Chief Boniface would start charging tenants for breathing compound air. Ngozi calculated silently how many extra bags of akara she would need to sell each week just to cover the gap. But for Sei, this particular announcement landed differently. Sei had been quietly struggling for weeks. His younger sister back in the village had fallen sick, and he had been sending almost every extra kobo he made towards her hospital bills, leaving barely enough for himself, let alone extra rent. He had already been 2 weeks behind on his current rent, managing to convince Chief Boniface's agent to give him small grace, promising to balance up before month's end. Now, with this sudden increase, that small manageable gap had just become a mountain. He stood quietly at the back of the gathering, saying nothing, his jaw tight, doing silent calculations in his head that were simply not adding up no matter how many times he ran the numbers. For the first time since he moved into that compound, Sei seriously considered that he might actually have to pack his few belongings and leave, sick sister or no sick sister, because staying was quickly becoming something he could no longer afford. Nobody made a big scene about it. Sei did not shout or protest like the others grumbling around him. He simply turned, walked back to his room, sat on the edge of his bed and stared at the wall for a long time, listening to the muffled sound of the meeting still going on outside, Chief Boniface's voice rising and falling as he explained his new payment structure. But that quiet moment, that one heavy silence in the middle of all the noise and comedy of that compound, planted something in every tenant who noticed it. Auntie Rachel, walking past his door later that evening and catching a glimpse of him sitting there, paused, said nothing, but made a small mental note, a small seed of real anger sitting underneath all the jokes and the landlord's wife theatrics, waiting for the right day to grow. Before we continue, let me quickly remind you, if you are new here, this is exactly the kind of story we tell on this channel every single week. Real compound life, real Nigerian drama, with just enough comedy to keep you laughing while it teaches you something. Subscribe now so you don't miss the next one. And let's get back into this compound because things are about to get even messier. From that day forward, life in Boniface House entered what the tenants themselves started calling the season of Wahala. Chief Boniface and Mama Boniface, still bitter about their failed wedding gift table, seemed to wake up every single morning searching for fresh reasons to disturb their tenants. It was as if they had opened a mental notebook titled New Ways to Collect Money and were determined to fill every single page. Water usage suddenly became a major topic. Mama Boniface began standing by the well with a stopwatch expression on her face, timing how long each tenant spent fetching water, accusing anyone who filled more than one bucket of wasting compound water, like the well belonged to Dangote himself. One morning, she accused Ngozi of overfetching simply because Ngozi needed extra water to wash her frying pans before heading out to sell akara. And the two women argued by the well for a full 10 minutes until Auntie Rachel physically stepped between them. Cooking became another battlefield entirely. Anytime smoke rose from that kitchen, Mama Boniface would appear like a masquerade, asking loudly what exactly was being cooked and how much gas was being used, as if gas cylinders belonged to her personally and not to whichever tenant had bought and carried it there themselves. Blessing eventually started cooking with her door half closed, peeking outside first like a criminal, checking for police before lighting her stove. Visitors were not spared either. If Blessing's cousin came to visit for the weekend, Mama Boniface would stand by the gate, arms folded, asking pointed questions about how long this cousin intended to stay and whether extra water and light usage would be compensated for. Chinedu once had a former schoolmate visit for barely 2 hours, and by the time the young man left, Mama Boniface had already asked him 3 separate times when exactly he was leaving. Then there was the clothesline war, which honestly deserves its own comedy special. Ngozi and Auntie Rachel got into a shouting match one afternoon over whose wrapper was blocking whose school uniform on the shared line. And before the argument could even settle, Mama Boniface inserted herself into the middle of it, not to make peace, but to announce that from now on, clothesline usage would be on a strict rotational schedule that she alone would control and enforce. She even drew up a timetable on a torn cardboard sheet and pinned it near the kitchen, complete with names and specific hours, as though she were running a small government parastatal instead of a washing line. Light became another daily drama. Anytime NEPA brought light, Chief Boniface would personally walk around, switching off any bulb he felt was unnecessarily on, even in tenants' own rooms, muttering about how electricity was not a gift from God, but a bill waiting to happen. Emeka came home one evening to find his own security light, the one he had personally bought and fixed outside his door, switched off by Chief Boniface himself, who simply explained that light left burning while the sun was still setting was wasteful behavior. And through all of this madness, new charges kept appearing from nowhere. A charge for compound cleaning, even though tenants swept the compound themselves on a rotating basis that existed long before the Bonifaces ever thought to charge for it. A charge for gate maintenance, even though the gate had not been touched in years and still creaked exactly the same way it always had. A charge simply labeled miscellaneous, which nobody could ever get Chief Boniface to properly explain, no matter how many times Blessing or Chinedu asked him directly what miscellaneous actually covered. Meanwhile, the toilet and kitchen wahala continued exactly as before. Mama Boniface still jumped every queue she met, toothbrush in mouth, wrapper tied high, reminding whoever complained that she remained forever and always the landlord's wife. The kitchen still saw its share of little dramas, arguments over whose pot was taking too long, whose seasoning smell was disturbing whose peace, whose firewood was placed where it should not be. One particularly memorable evening, Mama Boniface attempted to introduce a new rule that tenants could only use the kitchen in 30-minute slots, complete with an actual kitchen timer she bought specifically for this purpose. The very first evening she tried to enforce it, Ngozi's stew was still simmering when the timer rang, and when Mama Boniface tried to physically turn off Ngozi's gas burner mid-cooking, Ngozi firmly, calmly but very seriously informed her that if that burner went off before her stew was ready, there would be trouble that no landlord's wife title would protect her from. Mama Boniface, recognizing real danger when she saw it, quietly retreated, and the 30-minute kitchen rule was never mentioned again. Even the compound generator, an old, temperamental thing that only worked when it felt like it, became a source of new drama. Chief Boniface introduced a generator contribution fund that tenants were expected to pay into monthly, regardless of whether the generator actually worked that month or not. When Chinedu pointed out that the generator had not started successfully in nearly 6 weeks, Chief Boniface simply explained that the fund was for future readiness, a phrase so vague that even Mama Boniface had to turn away to hide her own confusion. Then there was the matter of the compound Christmas decorations, which arrived that December in the form of one small plastic wreath Chief Boniface hung on the gate, followed almost immediately by an announcement that a festive season maintenance charge would be added to everyone's rent for the month. Blessing laughed so hard when she heard this that she had to sit down on her shop stool, telling her hair clients in between fits of laughter that this man had somehow managed to turn Christmas itself into an invoice. Even small compound gatherings were not spared. When the tenants organized a modest end-of-year get-together among themselves, pooling their own money for drinks and shop chops, Mama Boniface appeared uninvited, helped herself generously to the food and drinks, and then on her way back to her room, mentioned casually that hosting unauthorized gatherings in the compound going forward would attract a small fee, as though laughter itself now required landlord approval. Then there was the matter of the visitor register, a fresh idea Chief Boniface introduced one Sunday afternoon with an actual exercise book he bought specifically for the purpose. Every visitor, he announced, must sign in with their name, phone number, and reason for visiting before being allowed past the gate. When Chinedu asked why a simple compound suddenly needed the security protocol of a government ministry, Chief Boniface explained with a completely straight face that record-keeping builds order. Within a week, the register had somehow transformed into another quiet revenue stream, with Mama Boniface charging a small verification fee to anybody whose visitors stayed longer than she personally felt was reasonable. Ngozi's own Akara customers became an unlikely casualty of this new system. Regular buyers who simply stopped by the gate each morning to collect their order suddenly found themselves being asked by Mama Boniface herself, standing in for her husband that particular week, to write their names in the exercise book like they were entering a courtroom rather than buying breakfast. One elderly customer, thoroughly confused by the whole procedure, simply turned around and started buying his akara somewhere else instead, a small but real loss that Ngozi never quite forgave the couple for. Even Auntie Rachel, who rarely complained about anything, found herself drawn into a fresh argument when her church members arrived one Sunday for a small prayer visit and were made to wait at the gate for nearly 10 minutes while Mama Boniface was interrogating them about their purpose of visit, despite Auntie Rachel standing right there in plain view, confirming that these were simply her church members come to pray with her. By the time the visitors were finally allowed in, the prayer meeting had lost most of its momentum, and Auntie Rachel spent the rest of that day muttering under her breath about landlords who had appointed themselves immigration officers. Every single day in that compound felt like an episode on its own, and every single day the tenants absorbed it, grumbled about it, laughed about it later in their rooms, but ultimately kept managing, the way tenants everywhere in that kind of life somehow learned to manage. But absorption, as anyone who has lived that kind of life will tell you, has a limit, and Boniface House was fast approaching that limit.
The breaking point arrived on a hot Saturday afternoon, when Chief Boniface called yet another compound meeting, this time with what he proudly described as final updates for the year. The tenants gathered, tired, drained, already expecting more bad news, and bad news is exactly what they received. Chief Boniface, with Mama Boniface standing beside him nodding along like his personal hype woman, announced a long list of brand new charges: a toilet maintenance fee, a kitchen usage fee, a visitor entry fee, a clothesline fee, a noise penalty for anyone whose television or phone speaker went too loud after 9 at night. And as if all of that was not already too much, he finished with one more rent increase. Something in the corridor shifted at that moment. It was not loud at first. It started as a low murmur, tenants turning to look at each other with expressions that had finally moved past frustration into something firmer. Chinedu was the first to speak up properly, his voice raised, asking Chief Boniface directly what exactly all this money was even being used for, since nothing in that compound had improved in years. Not the gate, not the toilet, not even the peeling paint on the outside wall. Chief Boniface tried his usual smile, tried his usual "my brother, calm down" approach, but this time it did not work.
Emeka joined in loudly, reminding everyone about the wedding cloth money that disappeared without explanation. Blessing brought up the empty gift table and how the rent increase right after it was clearly punishment dressed up as economics, her voice sharp with all the gossip-filled confidence she had built up over months of watching this couple operate. Then Sei, quiet Sei, who had stayed silent through almost every single previous meeting, finally spoke. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the noise because everyone knew Sei rarely talked at these things. He told them plainly that because of this same rent increase, he almost lost his room while his sister was lying sick in a hospital bed, and as some of them standing there laughing and joking did not realize how close some tenants were to actually losing everything because of this couple's greed. The corridor went completely silent for a moment. Even Mama Boniface, for once, did not have an immediate smart response ready. Auntie Rachel reached over and placed a steadying hand on C, and that small, quiet gesture said more than any shouting could have. That silence broke the dam. One by one, tenants began pulling out every single grievance they had been quietly collecting for months. Ngozi brought up the kitchen lockdown and the beans incident, reminding everyone how her soup had sat cold inside a locked kitchen, while Mama Boniface guarded an empty room out of pure spite. Auntie Rachel brought up the countless times Mama Boniface had jumped the toilet queue like royalty, toothbrush and all. Someone mentioned the fake repair charges for pipes that were never actually fixed, the maintenance fees collected for work nobody ever saw completed. Someone else brought up the light switching, the water timing at the well, the failed 30-minute kitchen timer experiment, and the endless miscellaneous fees that nobody could ever get properly explained. The compound, usually a place of small individual complaints muttered quietly behind closed doors, suddenly turned into one loud unified courtroom, and Chief Boniface and Mama Boniface were standing right there as the accused. Chief Boniface tried to defend himself, opening his mouth to explain one charge, but the explanation only reminded everybody of another charge which reminded them of another, until the whole compound was simply shouting over each other, dragging out every single memory of Wahala that couple had caused over the months. Someone even remembered the generator contribution fund for a machine that had not worked in weeks, and someone else brought up the infamous Christmas maintenance charge for one plastic wreath, and by the time all of it had been said out loud together in one place, even a few of the tenants who had stayed quiet through most of it were shaking their heads in disbelief at how much they had all simply been absorbing without complaint. Sensing things were spiraling completely out of his control, Chief Boniface attempted a quiet retreat towards the gate, hoping to disappear until tempers cooled down. Mama Boniface, panicking, grabbed his arm and reminded him rather dramatically that he could not simply run away because he was the landlord. Chief Boniface, cornered, sweating, and clearly done pretending to be calm, turned around and shouted back the line that would follow him around that neighborhood for a very long time. "Landlord is not security." The entire compound erupted into laughter mixed with fresh outrage, an unusual but somehow perfectly fitting combination for that particular moment. Even Chinedu, in the middle of his own anger, could not help doubling over laughing at how completely undignified his landlord looked in that moment, agbada sweat-soaked, sandals half off from trying to make a quick escape.
Realizing that the tenants were not backing down and that this argument had officially spiraled beyond his control, Chief Boniface, in a moment of frustration, announced loudly that he was tired of all of them, that he was selling the entire house, and that everybody needed to pack out. For a brief, glorious second, the tenants actually cheered. Finally, they thought, freedom from this endless wahala. Chinedu and Emeka were already high-fiving each other. Blessing was already mentally planning her next apartment, already calculating which street had better hairdressing clientele. Ngozi was thinking about relocating closer to a busier junction for her akara business. Even Sei allowed himself a small, tired smile, thinking that maybe leaving this compound, painful as it would be to find somewhere new, might actually be a relief. But their celebration lasted exactly as long as it took Chief Boniface to open his mouth again. He reminded them, with his usual business smile creeping back onto his face despite everything that had just happened, that anybody vacating the property would need to pay a moving out fee to cover wear and tear inspection. The cheering stopped immediately. The tenant stared at him in complete disbelief, wondering how a man in the middle of losing an entire argument could still find one more way to ask for money.
Blessing threw her hands in the air and asked to nobody in particular whether this man had a money-collecting demon following him around, because there was simply no other explanation for this level of persistence. And just when everyone thought that surely, that had to be the final insult, Mama Boniface leaned toward her husband and reminded him, quite helpfully, that he had forgotten something: the toilet fee. The one they had introduced earlier that same afternoon, the one nobody had actually paid yet. Chief Boniface paused, blinked, looked genuinely surprised at himself, and then nodded slowly. "Ah, correct," he said. The entire compound descended into one final wave of chaos, laughter, shouting, and disbelief, all mixed together in a way that only that kind of face me, I face you compound life could ever properly produce. Somewhere in the middle of it, Auntie Rachel simply sat down on the nearest bench, shook her head slowly, and said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, that she has seen many things on her years on earth, but never, not once, has she met two people so gifted in finding new fees in the middle of losing an argument. Because in that compound, one thing remained forever true. Rent could increase, tenant could complain, argue, and threaten to leave. The whole house could scatter into complete disorder in a single afternoon. But no matter what happened, Chief Boniface and Mama Boniface would always, somehow, find one more way to collect their money. In the days that followed, some tenants did eventually pack their things and leave, moving out fee and all, grumbling the entire way, but relieved to finally be free of toilet queues, kitchen timers, and clothesline schedules. Chinedu and Emeka, true to their word, found a smaller place 2 streets away, one with no shared kitchen at all, a detail they both agreed was worth every extra naira in rent. Blessing eventually relocated closer to her hairdressing clientele, taking half her regular customers with her, much to Mama Boniface's quiet irritation, since several of those customers had also been her own occasional hair clients. Others, like Sei, managed to negotiate one final grace period, helped along by the quiet solidarity the whole compound had discovered that Saturday afternoon, a solidarity that outlasted even Mama Boniface's stubbornness. Auntie Rachel, of all people, was the one who walked straight up to Chief Boniface a few days later and told him plainly, without raising her voice, that a man who wanted his compound to keep producing rent money needed tenants who were alive and standing, not tenants chased out over a hospital bill. Whether it was her words or simply the memory of that Saturday's chaos still fresh in his mind, Chief Boniface quietly agreed to let Sei his balance ride until the following month, no extra charge attached, a small miracle nobody in that compound had expected to witness. And somehow, impossibly, life in Boniface House continued, a little quieter, a little more watchful, but never fully free of its landlord and his wife. New tenants moved into the empty room soon enough, each one warned within their first week, usually by Blessing or Chinedu, about the toilet queue, the kitchen padlock, and the woman who insisted, forever and always, that she remained the landlord's wife. And that, my dear viewer, is the story of the compound of Wahala, a story of one greedy landlord, one even greedier landlady, and one long-suffering group of tenants who in the end found their voice, even if their landlord never quite found his conscience. If this story made you laugh, if it reminded you of one landlord or one landlady you have personally suffered under, drop a comment below and tell me your own experience. Because trust me, every Nigerian compound has at least one Mama Boniface hiding somewhere. Before you go, please do 3 things for me. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss a story like this one. Like this video so more people can find it. And share it with one friend who will understand this pain immediately. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next story.